The jacket is one of those small Sopranos objects that is not small at all, because it is basically a whole worldview stitched into leather, and the second Tony treats it like a normal jacket, Richie takes it like a personal attack. When Richie comes home, he comes home with an argument already loaded in the chamber. He has been away, and in his head that time does not count the way it counts for everyone else. He is frozen at the moment he left. The streets are the same, the hierarchy should still fit him like a glove, and the respect he was owed back then should still be sitting there, warm, waiting to be collected. But reality is crueler and it is quieter. People moved on. The current boss has his own style and his own priorities. The crew is used to doing business without Richie. So Richie walks back into this world with the most dangerous chip on his shoulder, the fear that he is no longer necessary. That fear pushes him into a specific kind of performance. Richie does not just want money, he wants proof. Proof that he is still feared, still remembered, still someone you have to deal with carefully. In his mind, respect is not an attitude, it is a tax. It has to be paid in visible ways. Tony does not naturally pay it the way Richie wants, because Tony's respect is practical. Tony measures people by whether they bring heat, whether they earn, whether they complicate the business. Richie measures people by whether they bow early enough, whether they say the right words, whether they behave like he is still living in the old version of the neighborhood. So what does Richie do? He tries to force the respect. Not directly at first, because direct demands can get you slapped down. Instead, he uses symbols, little rituals, gifts that are not gifts. That jacket is the cleanest example of that. Richie presents it like a treasure. He tells the story like a legend. This was taken from a guy with a serious reputation, a guy whose name carries weight, a guy who was known as the toughest around. Richie frames it as a trophy from a moment of dominance, the kind of dominance that makes your name travel. That matters because Richie is not just offering clothing. He's offering a piece of his myth. He is saying, this is who I am, this is what I did, this is the kind of fear my hands can still produce. And on top of that, he is saying, I am choosing you, Tony, to wear it. As if Tony is being invited into Richie's private museum of violence. But it is not only a compliment, it is also a test. If Tony wears the jacket, then Tony is publicly validating Richie's story and Richie's status. It says Tony accepts Richie as an elder statesman, a respected force from the past, a man whose accomplishments are not just remembered but honored. When Tony puts it on, even briefly, Richie is watching like a hawk. He wants to see Tony become a billboard for Richie's legend. Wear this and you are wearing me. Wear this and everyone sees you respecting me. Wear this and I get to feel like I walk back into the old world and nothing changed. Tony does the polite thing at first. He puts it on. He gives Richie the facial expression Richie wants to see. Tony is smart enough to know that you sometimes let a guy have his moment if it keeps the temperature down. But Tony also does something Richie never forgives. Tony treats it like a moment, not a bond. Because Tony does not like the jacket. It is not his style, and more importantly, it is not his identity. Tony's power comes from running things now. He does not need to wear someone else's violent nostalgia to feel solid. Richie needs that nostalgia the way a drowning man needs a plank of wood. That difference is the whole meaning of the jacket. To Tony, the jacket is just a loud piece of leather tied to an old story that does not help the business. To Richie, the jacket is proof that his old story still has value, and that his hands still matter. The jacket is a portable version of his reputation. It is memory you can touch. It is status you can put on your shoulders. It is a reminder to anyone who sees it that Richie came up hard, and that he wants the world to admit it. And here is the brutal part. Richie is not just proud of what the jacket represents. He is trapped inside it. He needs that story to be real, because without it he is just a guy who did time and came back to a world that kept spinning. The jacket is a shortcut back to relevance. Then Tony gives it away. Not to another captain. Not to a guy who deserves it in Richie's twisted logic. Tony gives it to the husband of his housekeeper, a normal working guy in Tony's orbit. The exact kind of person Richie would never choose as the owner of a trophy like that. And Richie ends up seeing this jacket in the wild on a man who has nothing to do with that old violence, standing there like it is just something warm to wear. That is why Richie gets offended so fast. Because the offense is not about leather. It is about what Tony is communicating without even trying. From Richie's perspective, Tony has taken Richie's myth and tossed it into the donation bin. Tony has taken a symbol of fear and lowered it into ordinary life. Richie wanted the jacket to sit on Tony like a crown. Tony treats it like clutter. Richie wanted the gift to tighten their relationship and force a certain respect. Tony treats it like a minor social obligation that expired the moment Richie walked out the door. And since Richie cannot admit what is really happening, that Tony does not fear him the way he wants to be feared, he converts that pain into insult. He tells himself this is disrespect, and in his world disrespect demands correction. The jacket also exposes something Tony understands that Richie does not. Power is not mainly about symbols. Symbols matter, but only when they match the real balance of power underneath. Richie thinks the old school artifacts create the balance. Tony knows the balance creates the meaning of the artifacts. Tony can wear the jacket, and it means nothing because Tony's power is not dependent on it. Tony can give it away and still be Tony. Richie cannot do that. Richie needs the symbols to get the reaction because he is insecure about whether the room still belongs to him. That is why Tony giving it to the housekeeper's husband is so devastating. Tony is not just rejecting the jacket. Tony is rejecting Richie's entire preferred language. Richie speaks in old reputations, old battles, old grudges, and visible fear. Tony speaks in results, money, stability, and control. When Tony gives that jacket away, he is basically saying, I am not living in your museum. I am not wearing your past. I run the present. Now add one more detail that makes the insult sharper. Richie gave the jacket to Tony expecting to receive something back, even if it was not spoken. Gratitude, deference, and invitation back into the inner circle. Maybe even a sense that Tony is slightly indebted. Richie is transactional in a way that pretends not to be transactional. He does favors with hooks attached. If Tony wears the jacket, Richie gets a return on investment every time someone sees it. Tony giving it away cancels the investment. It turns Richie's gift into a zero. And it does it publicly. If Tony simply never wore it again and kept it in a closet, Richie could still tell himself the story that Tony valued it. But when Richie sees it on the husband of the housekeeper, it is undeniable. The symbol has been demoted. The story has been demoted. Richie has been demoted. He is forced to confront the possibility that Tony did not just dislike the jacket. Tony did not care about what Richie was trying to accomplish with it. This is why Richie's anger feels outsized, but it is actually perfectly in character. Richie is not offended like a normal person who had a gift rejected. Richie is offended like a man whose entire claim to status just got laughed at by reality. The jacket was supposed to be armor. Instead, it becomes a mirror, and it is not like Richie stops at hurt feelings. In his head, if Tony is capable of giving away the jacket, then Tony is capable of giving away Richie. That is the paranoia that sits under all of Richie's moves. He is always scanning for signs that he is being pushed aside. The jacket becomes evidence in his internal case file. Tony is not taking me seriously. Tony is not honoring me. Tony is disrespecting me. And once Richie starts building that narrative, every interaction after he gets filtered through that lens, Tony, on the other hand, is insulted in a different way. Tony does not say it out loud, but Richie's whole jacket move is also disrespectful to Tony. It is Richie trying to define Tony from the outside. It is Richie trying to say, you should want this, you should dress like this, you should carry my story on your back. It is a power play dressed as generosity. Tony senses that, and Tony's instinct is always to reassert control by refusing to be shaped by someone else's ego. So Tony gives it away, and it is not only because he does not like it. It is because giving it away is Tony quietly cutting the strings Richie tried to attach. Tony is telling Richie, you do not get to brand me. You do not get to force me into your nostalgia. I can take your gift and do whatever I want with it. That is the real collision. Richie believes objects can hold status the way a bank holds money. Tony believes status comes from the room you control, not the props you carry. Richie believes tradition is authority. Tony believes authority is ability. The irony is that the jacket story involves Richie boasting about taking it from a feared man. Richie is proud that he stripped another guy of a symbol. He is proud that he humbled him. He does not reflect on what that means, that symbols are vulnerable, that reputations change hands, that status can be taken. Then Tony does something even colder. Tony does not take it by force. Tony accepts it politely, then makes it meaningless. Tony does not need to beat Richie to strip him. Tony just needs to shrug. And to Richie, a shrug is worse than a punch, because a punch admits you matter. That is why the offense is so deep. Richie is asking for conflict, because conflict at least confirms his weight. Tony's move is to deny him that. The jacket on the housekeeper's husband is Tony's way of saying, your old war stories are not running my household. And if you zoom out, the jacket is also the show's way of talking about generations. The older style of gangster identity is obsessed with the relics, the stories, the idea that fear is permanent if you can keep repeating the legend. But the world in the show is changing. The economy is changing. Law enforcement is changing. The crews are changing. Tony is not modern in a clean way, but he is modern enough to know that you cannot run a business purely on mythology. Richie is the opposite. He wants the mythology to do the managerial work for him. So when Tony gives away the jacket, it is not only a personal insult, it is a statement about which era is winning. It is the present telling the past that it is not automatically sacred. And Richie cannot handle that, because he does not have a second identity. That is why he keeps colliding with Tony. He does it over money, over territory, over perceived slights, over who gets to speak and who has to listen. The jacket is just the cleanest version because it is physical. You can see it. You can watch Richie's face change when he spots it. You can watch Tony realize, in real time, that Richie is not offended rationally. He is offended spiritually. Something in him is being threatened. The jacket's meaning, then, is a meaning about respect to survival. Richie believes respect keeps you alive. In his personal history, it probably did. So he chases it like oxygen. He cannot tolerate a world where his old reputation is not treated like a loaded gun on a table. Tony is not trying to humiliate him in a comedy sense. Tony is trying to manage him. But management looks like humiliation to a man who measures himself by the posture of everyone around him. And there is one more layer that makes it almost sad. Richie thinks he is offering Tony a bridge, a shared language, a way to connect through old school identity. Tony does not want it because Tony already has what Richie wants. Tony already has the room. Tony already has the authority. Tony does not need the jacket to feel like a boss. Richie does. So when Tony discards it, Tony is discarding the one thing Richie thought could equalize them emotionally. That is why Richie's offense is not about taste. Tony could hate the jacket for style reasons, and Richie would still be furious if Tony treated it like it was disposable. Richie wanted reverence. Tony gave him practicality. Richie wanted symbolism. Tony gave him household logistics. Richie wanted the jacket to be seen as history. Tony treated it like laundry. So the jacket becomes a scoreboard. Every time Richie thinks about it, he is not just thinking about leather. He is thinking about where he stands. He is thinking about whether his name still has gravity. He is thinking about whether Tony fears him. And because he cannot accept an answer that says no, he tries to force the answer to change. He demands more. He pushes harder. He escalates conflict. He grabs for control in places he should not. All because the jacket ended up on the wrong shoulders. That is the meaning of the jacket. It is Richie's attempt to turn the past into currency. It is a test he gives Tony without telling Tony the rules. It is a fragile symbol that Richie needs to be treated like sacred because he is scared the world already moved on without him. And Tony giving it to the husband of his housekeeper is Tony accidentally, and also a little deliberately, saying the quiet part out loud. Your legend is not my uniform. Your trophy is not my crown. And if I can give it away like it is nothing, then maybe you are not as heavy as you keep insisting you are.